Welcome. Our presentation is just about to begin. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Danae Simmons with the HCI Solution. Please make sure you can see the screen and you can hear me. If you have any troubles hearing me during or hearing any of us during the presentation, just let us know and we'll get that addressed right away. Today's presenter is Dan Collins, and he is going to share over 2 decades of experience with us. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Dan.
Thanks, Danae, and thank you all for coming today. We're going to cover Report Designer tips, tricks, and gotchas today. And if you have any questions, feel free to speak up and let me know. This is just going to be a mishmash of all the different tips and tricks that we've picked up along the way. And so what we're going to cover today is report versioning, basic versus advanced mode, field lookups, proper index selection, extraction report records, deleting blank lines in the report picture, aligning fields and graphics, rules with incorrect record selection, and we're going to talk about watching out for unexpected nil value variables and Meditech expression logic. So we're going to demonstrate a little bit. We're going to demonstrate how report versioning works. We're going to talk about creating and working with the draft version of the report. And whenever you're working with the draft version of the report, you should always be careful to check the report version, especially if you know you have a draft version out there, because I've had several times where I've gone in and I've been working with the draft version of a report and added code to the report and changed a bunch of things, and then later on started working on the report again without first selecting the draft version of the report. And then all of a sudden I remember, wait a minute, I think this report is different than what I remember. And then I remember, oh yeah, I have to go and change the version of the report to the draft version that I was working on. Because I'll demonstrate this in a minute, but the report designer, it doesn't warn you that there's a draft version out there, so it's easy to forget about. So I try to get myself into the habit of whenever I go into a report, I look at the versions and see if there's a draft version of the report out there. I'll show you that in a minute, and I'll show you how to create a new version of the report and restore an old version of the report. Let me get in there and show you that in one of our customers' test systems. All right, oh, looks like I need to re-enter in my credentials in this one. All right, so when you first go into the report, let me pull up a different report here, the one that I want to use for this presentation. Here's the one. When you first go into a report designer report, it always puts you into the report version, the very last report version, the last final version, not the draft version. So if you do a lookup on version here, you could see that this report in the lookup, it's showing 2 versions, but there are actually 3 versions of this report. There's the version we're currently in now, and that's really the second final version of the report. When I do a lookup here, I can see then there's also a version number 1 that I could go back to and this is the first final version of the report. And there's also a draft version of the report. And in order to edit the draft version, I can just go in and select a draft and do that. If I want to, let's say that I want to create a new version of the report, and I want to get rid of this draft version. Oops, I exited out by accident. I'm going to show you how you create a new report version and get rid of the draft version. What you would do here is you would go into your report. Maybe you might want to make some changes. Maybe I want to get rid of some fields. I'll remove those fields and I'll save a final version of this report. I'll show you in a minute an easier way to do that without exiting like I just did. So let's pull that report up again. Bar HCI, charges, tips. And now you can see I have yet another version of this report, number 2, that I just saved. Now let's say I wanted to discard the changes in my draft report. The way I would do that is I will click on, you can overwrite what's in your draft version of the report with the changes in the current report you're working on. And this is the one with the changes I just made where I removed a couple of fields over here in my report layout, but I can save this one as draft and overwrite the draft that I had before. And you get this nice prompt here where it says you want to continue editing the draft version of your report, and I'll say yes. You don't always get this prompt. I'm not sure why, but sometimes it doesn't allow you to just go right back in and continue editing the draft version of the report. But I'll explain some of the benefits of the draft version of the report in a bit. But for now, let's say I make some edits in the draft, and then I'm ready to take this draft and just change this draft version of this report into a final version of the report. All I have to do is, as long as I have the draft version of the report selected, click on Save Final, and it'll get rid of the draft version of the report and make whatever changes I had done in the draft. It will move those to the final version of the report. So now when I go in and do the lookup there's no more draft version, and then I see I have like 3 different versions of the report. Let me show you how to, I'm going to make some more edits, remove these fields. And there's another way that you can create a new version of the report without exiting out of the report, like I just kept doing. The way you do that is click on Create. And all that will do is it tells you here, it'll update the final version of the report. It'll create a new version number, and it will translate the report logic so that you can run the report with the latest changes. So that's nice that, it would have created a new version, and we can go back and look at that on the field section of our page and do a lookup here. And we can see that, okay, 1:09 p.m. Eastern time, we just created this new version. And I didn't have to exit out of the report, which is nice. And versioning is really nice, where it's really helpful to go back and be able to restore an older version. So let's say, I'll show you how that's done. I'm going to select an older version of the report, the one that still has some of those fields in it that I deleted. And this is going to say, changes have been made, discard the edits, and load this version. I'm going to say yes. And you can see now the field says version 2. If I look at the layout of the report, it has the fields that I deleted before have returned. And let's say I decide, oh, I want to keep this version of the report. That was a mistake to delete those other fields. I want to keep them. What you first have to do is they make you save an older version. They make you first save it in the draft status. So I'm going to save this as draft. Continuing editing draft version of the report. And let's just say, hey, I don't want to keep this in the draft version. I just want to put those changes back the way they were in the final version of the report. All I have to do then is click Save Final. And then you have to go back in and select your report again. And then you can do a lookup there. And so I've gotten into the habit of going in when I first go into the report, go in and do a lookup at the version prompt, make sure that there isn't a draft version out there that that I was working with before. So I'll get into talking about some of the advantages and disadvantages of working with the draft report. Let's see. So the advantages of working with the draft version is that a really cool thing is that you're able to make changes to the draft version of the report and test your changes without affecting the production version of the report that other users may be using. So, you know, I've done this before and working with customers where I've written a report for them, and then they say, oh, we want to add this functionality or these additional fields to the report. You know, usually, like if using NPI Report Writer, you would start working on a report, and what you were working on could affect what's going on in the live system, or you could write a report in the test system and then move it live, but you might not have great data in the test system. By working on a report in draft mode, I can work on the report with the live data without affecting how the users are using the report in the system. So that's a pretty nice feature. In order to execute debuggers for your report, the report has to be in draft mode, and the rules themselves have to be in draft mode too. And the rules in the report work the same way. You know, the rules have final versions to them, and the rules also have draft versions. And in order to execute performance analysis and put the report in diagnostic mode, the report has to be in the draft mode as well. And the report being in draft mode allows you to utilize the record limit fields so that you can run the report and you just say, oh, just include 10 records on the report. That's very helpful for when you're first writing and developing a report and testing it out. Instead of waiting for thousands of records to compile, you can just list off like the first 10 records and see how they look without waiting a long time. It also, having the report in draft mode also allows you to execute draft rules. So you can make code changes in draft rules that will not affect final versions of the rules that are being used in your final version of the report or other reports. There's some disadvantages of working with the draft version of the report. It's easy to forget that you have a draft version of the report out there because you have to actively look at it. When you first go into Report Designer, it doesn't give you any kind of warning that says, hey, just so you know, there's a draft version of the report out there. You have to go looking for it. And like I mentioned before, I've caught myself a few times, working on a report in draft mode and then kind of forgetting that the draft version was out there, and taking me a little while to look at the report that I pulled up the final version and realizing, hey, my edits weren't there. Oh, that's right, I made my edits in the draft version of the report. And also, when using the draft version of the report, you could make changes and save the draft and continue to make changes and save the draft, but those drafts aren't saved in different versions, which I think is one of the strengths of filing the report in the final version, is that you have all these different iterations of the report that you can go back to look at, how something was set up previously. And this is just a screenshot of the lookup, of the version lookup, showing that when you first go into Report Designer report, the version number is blank. And when it's blank, it always means, okay, this is the latest and greatest final version of the report. And there may still be a draft version out there with newer changes to it. But that's why I say you got to be careful when using draft versions of the report. You got to remember to go in and select them when you pull up the report. So now we're going to transition a little bit and talk about the different modes in Report Designer. Basic mode versus advanced mode. Right, let me pull up my little report again. My little sample report, and I'll show you that. It's right here. You can, this report's already written in advanced mode. I can't switch it back to basic mode, but this is what I'm talking about here, is the different modes of writing the report. But I include a little blurb here that describes what the difference is between basic and advanced mode. The Report Designer defaults to basic mode, but basic mode limits you to only writing the most basic of reports. You can't, it doesn't allow you to create rules, define links, or create custom fields. In order to do those things, you have to click on advanced mode. And the thing about basic mode is that I think Meditech tried to make the basic mode, make it a more simple report and easier to use, but than advanced mode. But I don't think that's what happened. I don't think they achieved their goal there. I recommend that people, just when you're writing a report, just automatically switch it to advanced mode. And it's not scary. It's not very much different than basic mode at all. There's no real advantages to basic mode, and basic mode ends up putting unnecessary restrictions on the report. So in my opinion, it's always better just to use advanced mode. We'll talk a little bit about field lookups. If you start typing in text at a field prompt, the lookup will search the Meditech application for the text, and this will take a while. Let me demonstrate that to you as well. So if I'm going to add a new field to this report, and I just want to type in like registration date and hit enter here, it's going to take a little while. Now, actually wasn't too bad. I've seen it take a lot longer, but it pulls up every field in the system called registration date for all these different applications. And I've seen it search NPR applications as well, not just MAT applications. But it's much better to first go into the field lookup and place the appropriate filters in the lookup, and at least define the object in the field lookup. And don't forget about using the contains search option in the lookup. Now I've created a little screenshot here. It's kind of like a little cheat sheet that explains what I find to be the best way to use this field lookup tool in the order of the actions that I take when I go into the field lookup. You know, first thing you want to do is when you go into the field lookup is click the objects button, and then in the search field, and then in the object field, type in the name of the object. So typically, you know, when you're going to look up a field, you know what object it's in, and then the next thing you do is type in the name of the field that you want to search on. And like I mentioned, don't forget that this filter down here, the starts with or contains, is helpful. So if you know that, okay, I want registration date, but I'm not sure if it's registration or maybe it's called admit date, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just looking for a date field. So you can type in just date, and instead of saying starts with date, you can say, show me all the fields that have date in the name. And the search will display all the fields that have date in the field name. And the next thing I do is, you know, well, I'd like to remind people that there's other field options other than just doing a field search on the Meditech databases. There's custom fields will allow you to do a lookup into, you know, any of the custom calculated fields that you've done on the report. Selects will show you all your selection fields that you've entered in on the selection field on the screen. Externals will show you, give you a lookup of all your external variables that you've created with rules. And of course, there's some system variables like that will, like, there'll be variables like, oh, what's the current user that signed on to the system? What's the HCIS name? What's the facility name? Things like that. And you can also choose queries, customer-defined queries. The next thing is that you don't, like to remind people, you don't have to exit out of the field lookup routine after you select a field. You know, you can continue to stay in the selection screen and select different fields, and those fields will be checked off even if you perform a new search. Those fields will still be selected, and they'll be in the selected fields list, which you can access from the button down at the bottom of the lookup. All right. Next thing is index selection. The improper use of the, you know, before I go into index selection, maybe I should show you just a couple of different things from the field lookup. Let me do that. So if I select registration date, and then I go under objects, and I want to choose something from bar account, maybe I want to choose transaction amount. And I can select that one. But if I go down here to selected, you can see it keeps track of all the different fields that I've selected, even across different searches. The custom fields provides a lookup into all the calculated fields that I've entered in on this report. Like I mentioned, selects, these are all the from and through dates and the facility on my selection screen. External variables, these are all the external variables that I have in use on this report that are attached to rules that this report uses. And this column here tells you exactly, okay, which rules these external variables are from. And then the system variables. Now is like for a date and time stamp. You know, report name. So I could select some of these standard fields and add them to the report. you know, a lot of these things are included in the standard report banner already. And then queries. I do have one query available to me here because it must be defined in one of my rules. Okay. So moving on to index selection. Improper index selection is the #1 cause for reports taking a long time to compile. The reason why that is because a lot of times that you may not have the first key from the index, you may not have defined on your report selection screen. So that means that when Report Designer goes to look for records to print, it has to go through every entry in the index, almost every entry in the index file to find the records that it needs to print. But rather, if you had the first key defined in the index, then it will only have to go through those index entries that you select. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go through this. Whenever possible, choose fields on your selection screen that are a key in an index. And I'll show you that. We have some screenshots that'll show you, how to determine if the key is part of an index. If the field is a key in one of the indexes. And you should always try to select the index that contains the most number of keys that are on the report selection screen. And you can always add more keys, add more fields to the selection screen to create more matches. So a lot of times when I'm working on a registration report, a lot of the indexes in registration call for have a facility key in them. So I'll always, if I'm writing a registration report, try to include the facility field on the selection screen because if the user is able to define a specific facility, then it will allow the report to go much faster. Instead of having to pull records from every facility in the system, then it'll only have to look at one specific facility and probably go a lot quicker. And it's most important to match the index's first couple of keys rather than its last keys. So this couple of screenshots right here is from the same report where based on the report selection screen where we had the reg account facility defined as a field on the report, and we had both a from registration date and a through registration date, and we also had a registration type defined on the report. This first screen up here in the top left-hand corner is the first index that Report Designer tried to propose to us as the one we should use, and it's doing that because it sees, okay, oh, the first 3 keys from this index are on your selection screen. But the issue I have with this index is that it's an ARM. This index has something to do with ARM, and this index may only have patients on it that have ARM activity on the patient. So I'm a little wary to use that index. Rather, I chose to use the FAC Reg Date Select Index, even though it didn't have as many matching keys on for this index. I think it was still a better index to use because it's not limited to ARM type accounts. So just keep in mind that Report Designer does a pretty good job of determining which index is the best index to use for your report. But sometimes, even though if it's listed first, like here, that might not be the index that you want to use. So you really have to look at it and put some thought into it. But these are both really good choices. I mean, well, the registration date select index is a good one, even though it only has 2 keys and the other one has 3. That it has the first 2 keys, which is most important. So this means that in going through records, when the report designer goes and runs the report and it tries to go through this index, if we didn't have facility and registration dates defined on our selection report, it would have to go, the report would have to churn through every facility and every registration date in the system. So basically every patient record in the system. But rather, when we have facility key defined and the registration date defined, we only have to go through one specific facility and one date range. So if we did December 20th, 2017 to December 20th, 2017, the report would only have to go through only the records that were for patients that were registered on this day and not have to go through a bunch of records from different days. So that's why selecting the index is so important to report compile times. Okay, changing the subject a little bit to extraction reports. This is an interesting tip. The record name associated to the record name field associates a group of fields with a record in the database. So if you're in your extraction report, the first field that you type into the extraction report, if that is reg account name, that field is in the main reg account record. And then so that record name that you supply there will be associated to the reg account main record, and all the fields in that section have to be from that record. I'll show you a screenshot of that in a minute. And the record name determines how fields, it also determines how fields in the report output are grouped. So by grouped means they can, determines what row the fields go on in your report download file. So here's an example of what I'm talking about with extraction type reports. The way you add fields to an extraction report is you first have to define a record name. And then in this report, I had 2 record names, one called REG for reg and one called BAR for bar. And in the top screenshot here, you could see that the reg record name was associated with reg account, the reg account main record in the registration database. And the second one was associated with the bar account transactions record. So all the fields in each of these different sections have to be associated to that the record that you have selected up here. And you can see in this screenshot that I have the billing transactions record selected, and you can see all the fields down here are billing transaction fields. Over here, we have the reg record selected, and that field is location record. The problem with this, the way this first screenshot is set up, is that when you go to download this report, it lists all the reg fields on one row, and then it'll list all the bar fields on a second row. And when you're trying to create a spreadsheet, it's not how you want the report to work. So the way that you fix that is you just give the records the same name, like I've done here in this second screenshot. So for reg, and I just called the second one reg too, even though it has billing fields on it. And it's got really nothing to do with the reg record, but we just do that, and it allows all those billing fields to print on the same line as the registration fields. Another tip I learned just recently. All right, so deleting blank lines in a report, I think is not that intuitive. Maybe when I show it to you and demonstrate it to you, you think it's pretty intuitive, but there are a couple of gotchas with deleting lines. Whenever you add new fields to the report picture, the report designer inevitably adds additional lines to the report that you don't want, and you always have to end up deleting blank lines that are created. But a lot of the ways you add and delete lines is just from dragging and dropping. And I'll demonstrate that. There is a workaround where you can't, usually to delete a line, you have to drag and drop the next section in the report over the previous section, and that will delete lines in the section that you want to delete lines in. But there's one issue where if you're trying to delete the last line in the report, there's no easy way to do that. You have to create a new section in the report temporarily. I'll show that to you. I've created a little table here. There's a little cheat sheet, and I'll demonstrate this in a minute. But if you want to add a row to a region, what the Show Rows button in the report has a lot of control over the behavior of, deleting and adding new rows. So I describe the behavior when that button is selected or unselected. So the way you add a row to a region is with that button selected, the Show Rows button selected, you click on a row and drag it down as far as you want, and you can create additional rows that way. Or with the Show Rows button unselected, you can click on the next region and drag it down. And I'll demonstrate all of this. And it's almost like just the opposite for removing rows from a region. You have to either select the row before the row you want to delete and drag it up to delete the row you want to delete, or you can grab, if Show Rows is not selected, you can select the whole section and drag it up to delete rows in the section that you want to delete. And I'll show you the workaround for deleting the last row in the report. So let me show you that in the system. So if I go over to the report layout picture here, and I want to add some lines to the last section here, notice I have Show Rows is not selected. You can see there's no row lines here. If I want to add lines to this last report trailer section, I will just click on this section and drag it down. Sorry, clicking on it and dragging it down adds rows to the previous section, adds rows to this KT1 region. But so if I want to delete those rows, I drag up this section and move it up, and it'll delete those extra rows. And it behaves a little bit differently if you have Show Rows selected. Then you can just select one row in the current section and drag it down, and it'll add rows in the section that you're in. And in order to delete rows in the same section, you can take the row, the last row, or the row before the ones you want to delete, select it. I'm holding down my left mouse button and dragging up, and that deletes rows. The issue that I was talking about with having the last row in the system, like it is, you need another section here to delete to delete rows from here. Let me show you what I'm talking about here and the workaround for that. I'm going to first get rid of this report trailer section so I can show you what I'm talking about. Get rid of the report trailer section. Oh, so I got to get rid of these totals. So go back to the layout. Oh. Field transaction for region. I have to delete that as well. Yeah. Oh, I have to delete the field. Sorry about that. So we go back to, and I think there was another field I had to delete. Field transaction amount for region RT or account transactions missing required field. I think let me exit out of there. I think I removed something I didn't want to remove. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that report. I want to delete this report trailer section so I can show you the little workaround here. Let's go down to report trailer section. Yeah, let's remove this one too. All right, there we go. So let me add another row here. Get rid of this line. In order to get rid of a line or a graphic, what you have to do is make sure that you don't have draw lines or draw boxes selected, and you have to click right on the line or box that you want to remove or edit. And it can be a little tricky because it's often hard to get your pointer right on the line. But what happens is I don't know, it might be hard to see in this presentation, but the plus symbol, the pointer, does change colors. It goes inverse. It goes from black to white in the middle, and that's a good indication like you're right over the line. And then you can click it, and I can click delete to remove that line. But I wanted to show you this. If I wanted to delete this last line in the report, there's no way for me to delete that line other than adding another section after KT1 temporarily to remove that line. So let me show you that. So I'll go back to regions, and I'll add the region after it, again, the report trailer region. I'm going to go back to layouts, and then I can select the report trailer, but I have to make sure that show rows is not selected. And so then I can grab this section and drag it up, and it deletes that last line. And then I can go back to regions and remove the report trailer. And that's kind of like a quirky workaround to, if you ever get stuck with one line at the end of a section and it's the last section in the report, you know, that's the only way I know of to delete that line. But other lines are easy to move around and change. You know, if I want to add a line up here to this section, I just drag this down. You know, if I want to remove those lines up there, I just drag this section up like that. So this table kind of explains, there's a little cheat sheet on explaining what actions you have to take to change your report picture and remove and add lines. So aligning fields on a report, there's a couple of different tools that allow you to do that. Use your mouse for large moves. You can use your keyboard arrow keys for more fine control and placement. And use the red measurement field in the top right-hand corner of the Report Designer report picture. And also you can use the edit feature. So I'll show you now, I'll show you what that looks like. This is when you have a field selected, a field or a label selected, and you'll see up in the top right-hand corner, the Report Designer is going to give you a measurement in inches. And I think this little line diagram here is supposed to represent the left margin. So this is how many inches away the field is from the left margin. So you can see this one is 6.03, but then the field below it is a little bit closer to the left-hand margin. You can see it's a little bit more over to the left, and it has a measurement of 5.9 inches. But if I wanted this charge date to be, the label to be right over that other field, I would most likely want to move the charge date field closer to the left and move that over until it read 5.96875 inches. So let me show you that. Right here, you can see how charge date and this transaction service date field are not quite really aligned right. But like I said, when you want to make big moves to fields, you just have to drag and drop it and move the field where you want to. But if I want to make slight changes, it's better to select that field and use the arrow keys. I'm going to move this, push my left arrow key one time, maybe twice, and now that says 5.96875. I click on that transaction date, service date field. Now I can see that they're completely aligned, which is great. You can also click on edit here, but it doesn't tell you that where on the report the field is positioned. But when you're working with graphics, you know, if I draw a line and I draw, let me show rows, and if I wanted to draw maybe a horizontal line at the end of this section, I can just draw it here. You can click on the undo here to undo what you did. I wanted this line to go all the way across. But sometimes you don't get it all the way across with your mouse, but after you draw the line, you can go in and make edits to it. So I'm going to unselect draw lines and click on it. And then I can go under edit, and it's telling me how far away from the left edge of the report I am. I do want that to be all the way over to the left. So I'll enter in 0, 0 there, and it'll move the line all the way over to the left. And I also don't want the line to be in the center of the row. I want it to be on the bottom of its row. So I'm going to type in bottom there and file it. And you'll see that this will move the line to the left and down. So now it's at the very bottom of that row and the very left and goes all the way to the end. That's great. And it tells you up in the red here, it tells you that this line goes from all the way in the left edge of 0, 0 inches to 10.25 inches all the way on the right. And when you're doing vertical lines, when I was messing with vertical lines earlier, I got the report to crash. So let's see if this happens again. But you can draw a vertical line. And again, you can go under uncheck draw lines and click on that line. And again, with these, you can move them with your arrow keys as well. So if I wanted to line this up, and I can see if I look at the top right-hand corner here, you want to get things lined up just right, you can look at that measurement, and then you can click on edit here. And it tells you, like, if I wanted to move this to a specific location on the report, I can edit the value here. I can say the upper point of the line, the lower point of the line, and gives you some real control over the graphics when you go under edit. You can really reposition things here. All right, so back to the slide deck. And this just kind of is a graphic that shows you, what I was just demonstrating. Changing subjects a little bit. One of the things about rules, and we got a few more minutes here, so I'll try to quickly go through the rest of this material. When working with rules, it's very important to make sure that the record, make sure you pay attention to the record that's associated to the rule. Make sure it's the right one. I'll show you a screenshot of this in a minute. And the record that's associated to the rule stays with the rule, but if you move your rule around your report to different areas in the report, the rule that the record that the rule is on when the rule is executed may not match up with a record that's assigned to the rule, and that can cause problems. So, and here's a screenshot of a rule, and the record we've highlighted the record field here. It's associated to this rule, and all the V variables here. V0 means that this is the first key for the reg account main record. And if there's more than one, there would be a V0 variable here for the second key for that record. But if I took this rule and moved it to a different area on the report, that if that area on the report was not associated to reg account main, then these variables coming into the report might not be correct. So you might not have the right keys defined for this rule when you go into it. So that's just something to pay attention to. And some rule troubleshooting tips. Use the debugger. In order to use the debugger, you have to, like I mentioned before, the rule has to be in draft mode and the report also has to be in draft mode. Watch out for unexpected values in variables. Watch out for variables that have nil values that you weren't expecting when you wrote your rule. And when working with lists in your rules, nil value lists will have a size of nil, not 0. That's just something to watch out for and pay attention to as well. And when inserting a do loop, watch out for improperly defined loops on keys. If the do loop expects a record key to already contain a value, but it does not, you will run into problems. I'll show you that on this next screenshot. When you set up do loops and when you set up records in rules for looping, you have to define which key the rule is going to loop on. So in these two examples here, it's from the same rule and the same record. One of them has the loop defined on reg account charge procedure. And that means that the loop is going to be done on both reg room charge procedure and room charge procedure. And reg account is going to be known when you go into the rule. But if you look at the second screenshot here, the loop is set to the bottom key. So what that means is that we're only going to be looping on charge procedure codes here. We're not going to be looping on dates, charge process dates. And there's one thing that tips you off to that too, is that the variable here field is white here as well, meaning that this could be changed to a constant instead of a variable. That just tips you off to say that these two first keys are not being looped on, are not being iterated on. Only the last procedure code is being iterated on. You can run into problems with this where your rule expects the date, the process date, to be defined. But if you're not setting that date up, and you're expecting the rule to loop on those dates, then you could run into problems. So that's just another thing to pay attention to. That's I've seen, looking at a lot of report designer reports, a lot of problems with this not being set up properly. Couple more things quickly. Be aware of Meditech's order of operations. In all of Meditech's programming languages, the order of operations is always from left to right. It's a little different than what we were taught in math, right? Like, you know, multiplication and division are first, and then addition, you know, order of operations. But Meditech, it's always left to right unless parentheses are used. So this has consequences too. You know, when an expression is evaluated, the left-hand side of the expression is always returned as the value if the expression evaluates to true. So again, this does have some consequences when writing your code. It's important to know that, again, that when an expression is evaluated, the left-hand side of the expression is always returned as the value returned from the expression if the expression evaluates to true. I'll show you a little table that kind of highlights this. So I have some little scenarios here where X and Y are variables, and the scenario is if X equals 55 and Y equals 50, and you evaluate this expression, you're going to return, the value returned from this expression is going to be 55, because you're always returning from the left-hand side. With this expression, you're returning nil, because this is not true. 55 is not less than 50. And then this one, Y is less than 50. And again, you're returning, you notice we moved the Y on the left-hand side here. So we're returning 50 instead of 55, because Y happens to be on the left-hand side of the expression here. This is saying 55 is not equal to 50. That's true, so you return 55. And this last one here is the most interesting one, because if X has a nil value, has no value, and Y is 50, it's true that X does not equal 50, but since we always return the value of what's on the left of the expression, we're still going to return nil. So that's something to watch out for. That's why a lot of times in Meditech code, you'll see things like X concatenated with dot not equal to Y concatenated with dot. That's to protect for things like this. That's a very interesting one. And one more really interesting one is, you know, how the use of parentheses can affect things. And I don't know if I'll have time to go into this one in too much detail, but know the same code that's written here can have a different result just by placing parentheses around it. So what happens here is this expression is evaluated. This whole expression here is evaluated. Position is less than length. Okay, that's going to equal 6. It's going to return 6. And then you do an expression. You do 6 and the value of found, which equals yes in this case. you're going to return 6. And then remember, we're always going left to right. So then we're going to do the expression 6 not equals to yes. You're going to return true there. And the problem here is that this loop will not terminate if found is equal to no, or where it should. But you change the expression fundamentally when you add parentheses here. So what's going to happen is you do this expression first. Found is not, in this case, you're going to say found is equal to y. So found not equal to y is false because y does equal y. So you're going to return nil here. So what you're going to do is the same kind of expression you did before. This is still going to equal 6. But then at the very end, you're going to end up doing 6 and nil. So return the minimum of 6 and nil, and you're going to return nil. So keep in mind that order of operations, everything from left to right, we've seen a lot of problems with that, and I think it's unique to metatext programming languages, and it catches a lot of people up. So that was I went through that one pretty quickly, but that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions? And we will send out a copy of the PowerPoint presentation after the presentation. Keep an eye on our website for webinars that we will continue to add, the hcisolution.com/webinars. Thank you for your time today. Danae, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Nope, you covered everything. Thanks, Dan.